Fix your drainage problem, or the fines start. She slapped the HOA notice against my gate and pointed at the muddy trench running through my nursery like she had just caught me doing something wrong. Behind her, the subdivision lawns were green. Behind me, rows of trees were lying sideways in mud. That contrast bothered me. I had owned the nursery long enough to know how water crossed that ground, and this wasn't normal runoff. A new channel had appeared along my uphill boundary, carrying stormwater directly from the HOA's detention basin into my growing fields. Someone had changed the drainage. Someone paid for it. And now the same board benefiting from that change was blaming me for the damage. I could have argued at the gate. Instead, I bought rain gauges, set cameras, and pulled the county drainage plans. That was when the first real problem showed up. My name is Dane Mercer. I was 46 when this happened, and for most of my adult life, I had made a living putting things in the ground that other people wanted to keep alive. Trees, mostly. I started as a landscaping laborer in my 20s, worked crews through southern Arizona summers that could cook a tape measure on a truck dashboard, then eventually built Mercer Desert Landscape into a decent small business. Nothing glamorous. Trucks, trailers, irrigation fittings, payroll on Fridays, and a permanent layer of dust in places dust should not logically be able to reach. 7 years before the HOA trouble started, my wife Mara and I bought a 23-acre commercial nursery outside Tucson. The previous owner had been growing desert stock there since the late 80s. Mesquite, desert willow, palo verde, acacia, ironwood, trees that understood Arizona better than most developers did. Growing our own stock gave us control over quality and saved money on wholesale orders, but it also meant that a good part of our net worth was standing outside, in rows quietly gaining value, one growing season at a time. A 12-foot desert willow is not something you replace Tuesday because somebody wrecked it Monday. It takes years. Our nursery sat below a subdivision called Sonoran Vista. The houses were new, large stucco, and arranged along the top of a low mesa about 40 feet above our north property line. Sonoran Vista marketed itself as desert luxury, which apparently meant using enough water to make Arizona occasionally forget it was Arizona. The common lawns were green. Their entrance had flowers. There was even a decorative pond built into the HOA's stormwater detention basin. That basin mattered. When Sonoran Vista was approved, the engineers designed it to collect runoff from roofs, streets, sidewalks, and landscaped common areas during monsoon storms. Water was supposed to rise temporarily inside the basin, then discharge east through an armored spillway and culvert toward a natural wash, not toward us. For years, it didn't. I knew because I watched water for a living. Landscaping teaches you that pretty quickly. People notice flowers. Landscapers notice grade. Water does not care what anybody's bylaws say. It goes downhill. And until that summer downhill from Sonoran Vista had never meant straight through my growing fields. The HOA president was a woman named Corinne Voss. She was 54, bright blonde, always polished, and had a habit of appearing at the nursery in clothes that looked more suited to a fundraising luncheon than a gravel driveway. The first time she came out that summer, she was wearing a fuchsia pantsuit and pink heels. That outfit against Arizona dust was hard to miss. She had complained about our delivery trucks before. Then pallets. Then dust. Then the fact that a row of empty 15-gallon containers could be seen from the subdivision access road. I handled the reasonable complaints. The unreasonable ones went into a folder. I had no particular opinion about Corinne at that point. Everybody who runs a business next to residential property eventually meets somebody who thinks looking at your operation gives them jurisdiction over it. Then the monsoon came. You can smell an Arizona storm before you can always see it. Creosote releases this dark, clean smell when the first rain hits it, and for about 30 seconds the desert smells like somebody opened the earth. That storm dropped hard and fast. The next morning I walked the north rows and felt wet caliche clay collecting under my brown work shoes until each step weighed a little more than the one before. Half an acre was torn up. Root balls were exposed. Young trees leaned at angles that trees are not supposed to lean. One irrigation lateral had been dragged almost 20 feet. Wet mesquite leaves were plastered against the chain-link fence. Behind the damage was a muddy channel entering through the northwest side of the property. New, sharp-edged, concentrated, not natural sheet flow. 2 days later, Karen arrived with the violation notice. 10 days to correct the erosion condition. After that, she said the HOA would begin assessing fines. I looked at the water damage, then uphill towards Sonoran Vista. The nursery irrigation pump hummed behind me with that low mechanical vibration I had heard 10,000 mornings. And I remember thinking one thing very clearly. They were fining the downhill property for water coming from uphill. That was either a remarkable misunderstanding, or somebody already knew exactly what had happened. I did not repair the trench immediately. That irritated Mara at first, not because she disagreed with me, but because it looked terrible, and she was the one who had to explain to customers why part of our nursery suddenly resembled the Colorado River's less successful cousin. But once ground gets disturbed in a dispute, you can lose information. So before we moved dirt, I documented it. I drove steel stakes at the visible sediment line. I marked the deepest scour points. I photographed every damaged irrigation connection and every exposed root ball. Then I mounted 3 motion-capable cameras along our north boundary with synchronized timestamps. One faced uphill. One looked laterally along the fence. The third covered the growing rows where the damage had been worst. I also bought 2 manual rain gauges. One went near the office. The other went near the northwest property corner. I wanted to know whether the nursery itself was receiving some unusual local rainfall pattern before I accused anybody of anything. It wasn't. 3 evenings later, another storm moved through. Not a major one. The kind of summer rain that darkens the pavement, knocks the dust off your truck, and makes every driver in Tucson temporarily forget how brakes work. I watched the cameras from my kitchen. At 7:18 p.m., runoff appeared along the subdivision slope. At 7:23, water began entering the depression above my fence. At 7:25, one camera caught something I had never seen there before. A narrow stream became a concentrated brown surge. It came through one exact point, not 30 feet wide, not wandering. One outlet. The flow hit the nursery side, spread slightly, then followed the fresh trench through the same rows that had been damaged during the first storm. I replayed it 4 times. Mara leaned over my shoulder. That's coming out of a pipe. Maybe. It looks like a pipe. It looks concentrated. She gave me the look married people give when they know you are refusing to say the thing you obviously think. I went outside the next morning. From my side of the boundary, I could see recently disturbed soil uphill. New decorative rock had been scattered over parts of it, and several small shrubs looked freshly planted. The soil underneath was darker than the surrounding grade. Somebody had worked there. I stayed on my property. That mattered too. If I later claimed the HOA had crossed lines, I did not want to explain why I had crossed one myself while collecting evidence. By noon, I had a folder on my office desk labeled Sonoran Vista Drainage. Inside went the violation letter, printed weather data, motographs, camera screenshots, rainfall measurements, a simple map showing camera locations. If there is one practical thing I learned early in construction disputes, it is that the photograph you think you will remember becomes strangely hard to explain 6 months later if you cannot prove when and where you took it. If a condition may become evidence, document it before you improve it. That afternoon I sent Karen a certified letter. It was short. I told the HOA that stormwater was entering my property from a concentrated discharge point along Sonoran Vista's southern drainage area and causing measurable damage. I asked them to identify any stormwater structure temporary channel overflow route maintenance project or contractor work performed in that location during the previous 12 months. I also requested that no drainage feature near our shared boundary be altered until the cause could be established. 5 days later, I got Karen's answer. She denied that Sonoran Vista had modified its drainage. She said the detention basin had operated substantially as designed for years. Then she suggested that grading work at my nursery was likely responsible for concentrating water. I had not done grading work on that portion of the nursery in more than 3 years. She knew we were a landscape company, though, and apparently that was close enough. At the bottom of the letter was the part she probably thought would get my attention. The 10-day correction deadline remained in effect. Failure to cure the condition would result in a fine of $250 per day. I read that sentence twice. Then I read the attached memo from a landscape consultant hired by the HOA. It was 1 page long. The consultant had never contacted me, never inspected my property, never measured the grade, never reviewed my irrigation system. Still, the memo suggested that downstream commercial maintenance practices may contribute to visible erosion. May contribute. That is useful language if you want to sound technical without technically saying much of anything. The next morning, I added the letter and memo to the folder. Then I looked at the camera footage again. Karen had begun building a paper trail, so I decided to build a better one. The Pima County Development Records Office was less dramatic than people imagine government evidence should be. Fluorescent lights, gray counters, a printer that sounded like it resented every page. But boring rooms have ended plenty of exciting lies. I requested the approved civil plans for Sonoran Vista, grading plan, drainage report, stormwater exhibits, revision sheets, anything showing the detention basin and the southern edge of the subdivision. A technician pulled the digital file and helped me identify the final approved plan set. The basin was there. So was the discharge route, and the arrows did not point toward my nursery. They pointed east. The drawing showed an armored emergency spillway and a culvert system carrying controlled discharge to a natural wash well away from our northwest growing field. I found an older aerial photo. Same thing. No western channel. No outlet at my boundary. I printed the relevant sheets full size and took them to a civil engineer named Merritt Kersey. Merritt had done hydrology work on several commercial projects where my crews installed the landscaping afterward. He was the sort of engineer who could stare at dirt for 10 minutes and somehow make you feel the dirt had confessed. We met at the nursery the next morning. He wore a broad sun hat, carried survey equipment, and said almost nothing for the first hour. He shot elevations from the nursery boundary, checked slope, marked the visible channel, compared the grade against the approved plan. Then he stood near the fence and looked uphill. That cut is directing flow. You're sure? He pointed. Natural drainage spreads. This is shaped. Somebody gave the water a path. Using GPS points and a laser level, Merritt traced the slope from the concentrated entry point through our damaged rows. It was not random. The grade fell consistently from Sonoran Vista's basin area toward the northwest corner of my property. He would not estimate exact flow without more data, but he explained the basic problem. A detention basin collects water from a large area. If you release that water through a narrow route, you increase concentration. Same water, smaller path, more force. In a strong monsoon cell, Merritt said, that could mean tens of thousands of gallons moving through the nursery in a relatively short period. That afternoon, we compared his field notes against the county plans. The conflict was obvious enough that even I could explain it without engineering jargon. Approved water route east. Observed water route west. My property west. I sent Karen a second letter. This one included a copy of the approved drainage sheet and a summary from Merritt. I asked the HOA to temporarily lower the operating level of the decorative basin and irrigation reserve while the drainage discrepancy was investigated. Her response arrived by email less than 3 hours later. She copied the entire board. Mr. Mercer, she wrote, the association will not alter community infrastructure based on a landscaper's interpretation of engineering documents. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes people hand you the exact sentence your attorney will enjoy later. Merritt read it and raised an eyebrow. I'm technically the one interpreting them, I noticed. There is another practical point worth remembering. Approved subdivision plans are not mystical documents kept in some underground vault, accessible only to people wearing hard hats. Grading plans, drainage reports, plats, permits, and revision exhibits are often part of the public development record. When somebody says, that's how it was designed, go find the design. The next morning, one of my crew leads, Rourke, called me from the north field. You need to see this. During the night or very early that morning, the HOA had installed temporary construction fencing along its side of the boundary. Behind the fence, fresh decorative gravel now covered much of the disturbed soil Merritt had photographed. A line of young shrubs had been added too. From the subdivision road, the area looked landscaped, neat, finished, like nothing had happened. But we already had photographs. We already had elevations. And we already had video showing water coming through the same location before the cleanup. I took new pictures without touching anything. By then, the first fine had technically begun accumulating. $250 a day. Corinne sent another notice, reminding me that the violation remained uncured. That was the moment my irritation turned into something colder. She was no longer just refusing to investigate. Someone had physically changed the appearance of the drainage area after receiving written notice that it was disputed. And somehow the only emergency Sonoran Vista could see was the mud on my side of the fence. I called Merritt. Then I called an attorney. Her name was Adrienne Hale. She practiced real estate and land use law, and the first thing she told me was not to threaten anybody. That was reassuring because threatening people had not been high on my list. I mean legally, she said. People get angry. Then they write 12 paragraphs they wish they hadn't. I write short paragraphs. Good. Keep doing that. I sent her everything. The county plans, Merritt's field notes, rainfall records, camera clips, HOA notices, Corinne's emails, the one-page consultant memo, photographs before and after the decorative rock appeared. Adrienne spent 2 days reviewing it. Then another storm hit. This one was heavier. I was at the nursery when it arrived. The wind came first, pushing hot dust across the rows until the sky turned a dull copper color. Then rain struck the metal roof over our potting shed hard enough that conversation stopped. Within minutes, runoff appeared at the north end. I walked to the camera monitor. The concentrated flow was back. And this time, it had teeth. Brown water drove through the existing trench, clipped the side of a container row, and knocked several young desert willows flat. Plastic pots rolled downstream. One disappeared under the fence surrounding our irrigation manifold and hit a valve box with a hollow crack. By the time the storm passed, a section of manifold had shifted, and another strip of soil was gone. We spent the next morning inventorying damage. Mara ran the numbers. Lost stock, labor, replacement soil, irrigation repairs, equipment hours, trees that might survive but could no longer be sold at full grade. The preliminary total came to just over $38,000. And that was before we priced full restoration. Corinne's response, another letter. The HOA claimed my failure to timely remediate the erosion condition had allowed the problem to worsen. They were referring the accumulating fines to council. I called Adrienne. She was silent for several seconds. Then she said, "Good." I thought I had misheard her. Good. They've involved council. Now professionals can start talking. Her first move was not a lawsuit. It was a preservation letter. She sent it to Sonoran Vista, its management company, its attorney, and the contractor, believed to have performed maintenance near the detention basin. The letter required preservation of board minutes, emails, text messages, invoices, contractor proposals, change orders, photographs, engineering communications, and records related to basin maintenance or drainage work. No accusations, no speeches, just categories of documents and dates. A lot of disputes turn on what somebody says happened. Better disputes turn on what they wrote before they knew anyone would care. Before arguing about intent, make sure the records cannot quietly disappear. 3 days after the preservation letter went out, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The sender was Nolan Reese, one of 5 Sonoran Vista board members. His message contained only 2 sentences. I think you should ask for the basin maintenance project from last summer. I voted against the way it was handled. Adrienne told me not to contact him directly yet. Instead, she sent a formal request through HOA Council for records relevant to the maintenance project. The first production arrived the following week. It was incomplete. Meeting minutes, vendor invoices, a few engineering emails, budget summaries, receipts for landscape work. Adrienne and I sat at her conference table going page by page. Most of it was unremarkable. Then I found an invoice from a grading contractor named Red Mesa Earthworks. The description read, temporary west overflow channel, per board direction. I stopped. Adrienne reached across the table. Let me see that. The invoice amount was $17,600. Attached behind it was a change order, signed by Corinne Voss. The original contract was labeled Detention Basin Maintenance. The change order authorized additional work. Temporary overflow grading. Western side. Field routing. Adrienne read the page twice. Then she looked at me. Do you understand what changed? Yes. Until that moment I had evidence that water was coming from Sonoran Vista. Now I had their invoice saying they had paid someone to create a western overflow route. But that was not the best document in the packet. The best one was still underneath it. The next page was an engineering recommendation dated 4 months before the first flood. Sonoran Vista's original east culvert had deteriorated. There was concrete spalling around one section, sediment buildup near another, and enough damage that the HOA's consulting engineer recommended repair before peak monsoon season. Estimated cost $94,000. I whistled. Adrian kept reading. The engineer had also recommended lowering the detention basin's normal operating water level until the culvert repair could be completed. That mattered because Sonoran Vista was using part of the stored basin water for common area irrigation. Lower the level and the decorative pond got smaller. The lawns became more expensive to keep green. Then came the board minutes. Karen had objected to the repair cost. She argued that a major culvert project would force either a special assessment or a significant reserve draw. A month later, the $17,600 Red Mesa change order appeared. In the homeowner budget summary, that work was described as landscape drainage maintenance, not west overflow. Not emergency rerouting. Landscape drainage maintenance. There was also a small sketch attached to the contractor file. The proposed temporary western channel ended several feet before the Sonoran Vista property boundary. On paper, runoff was supposed to spread within HOA land, but our cameras showed concentrated flow emerging directly toward the nursery. That meant one more question needed answering. What had actually been built? Adrian requested Red Mesa's daily field notes. Merritt compared the contractor's sketch with the elevations he had measured. His conclusion was careful. The observed grade is inconsistent with the termination shown here, so somebody extended it. I can tell you the field condition extends the hydraulic path. I cannot tell you who ordered it yet. That was why I liked Merritt. He never gave me a dramatic answer when an accurate one would do. The documents changed the entire dispute. Sonoran Vista's board knew the east drainage system needed expensive work. Karen had resisted the repair. The HOA then paid for a much cheaper western overflow project. And after water began crossing my nursery, Karen had fined me for erosion. That was no longer a debate about whose dirt was poorly maintained. But Adrian would not let me celebrate. Paper proves authorization, she said. It does not automatically prove the as-built condition or every dollar of your damage. What do we need? A clean field record. Preferably one an official can observe. Outside her window, clouds were building over the mountains. Monsoon season was not finished. In fact, the strongest part was usually still ahead. For the first time since the whole thing started, I realized the next storm might not be something I had to fear. If we prepared correctly, the water could answer the only question Karen still had room to deny. Where did it actually go to? Merritt drew the plan on a yellow legal pad in my office. Not a revenge plan. That distinction mattered. The last thing I wanted was to solve an illegal drainage problem by creating another drainage problem. Our strategy had 3 parts. Protect the nursery. Measure the flow. Get an official witness. Merritt designed a temporary interception swale entirely inside my property. It was shallow permitted and placed downstream of the disputed outlet. The swale would catch concentrated runoff before it reached our most valuable growing rows and guide it into a temporary catch area where the water could spread safely. No wall. No dam forcing water back uphill. No surprise berm aimed at Sonoran Vista. Nothing that would give the HOA a legitimate damage claim. At one end of the catch area, Merritt specified a simple, marked measuring section so we could document water depth and approximate discharge during a storm. We installed a staff gauge, a fixed camera, backup battery power, survey marks that could be checked afterward. Then we used straw wattles and small gravel check sections to slow sediment inside our own property. None of it looked impressive. If you were expecting some giant bulldozer trap with flames coming out of the side, you would have been disappointed. Engineering revenge, when done correctly, often resembles very organized landscaping. My crew loved it anyway. Rourke started calling the catch area Karen's swimming pool. I told him that the name was never to appear in an invoice. Can I put it on the whiteboard? No. A little sign? Absolutely not. Mara laughed for the first time in weeks. While we built the physical side, Adrian worked the legal side. She sent the county drainage inspector the approved plan set Red Mesa invoice, signed change order, merits, survey points, photographs, and selected camera clips. The inspector agreed there was enough discrepancy to justify a field review. Merritt also suggested a tracing test. The idea was straightforward. Under county supervision, use a small amount of approved, non-toxic tracing dye at a controlled point. Then observe whether that tracer appeared at the disputed discharge downstream. We did not just dump dye into the basin. Merritt coordinated it with the inspector. The inspector approved the test procedure and conditions. If the weather allowed it, would provide another visual way to establish hydraulic connection. Meanwhile, Mara did something less dramatic but just as important. She rebuilt the damage spreadsheet. Every affected tree had a row number, species, size, purchase or propagation date, wholesale value, expected sale class, labor already invested, probability of recovery, replacement cost where recovery was unlikely. The irrigation repairs were listed separately, soil work separately, equipment hours separately, attorney and engineering expenses separately. No round number labeled pain and suffering because Karen annoys me. Just records. That kind of detail is boring, right up until somebody asks you to prove a loss. We moved the most valuable stock out of the flow path. We repaired enough irrigation to keep surviving trees alive. But we left selected scour marks undisturbed, where Merritt and the county could see them. I also backed up every camera clip in 3 places. Office computer, external drive, cloud storage. Maybe that was excessive. Then again, I was being fined $250 a day by people whose defense seemed to depend on everybody forgetting where water came from. One afternoon, standing beside the new swale, I told Merritt what I had wanted to do when this started. I wanted to put a berm right there and send everything back. He shook his head. And then their lawyer would spend 6 months talking about your berm instead of their channel. I know. The cleanest countermeasure is the one that does not create a new argument. That stayed with me. The setup we built would not punish Sonoran Vista. It would not flood anybody. It would not damage property. It simply took runoff already entering my land and made it measurable. The county inspector came out on a dry afternoon and photographed everything. He checked our permits, confirmed our swale stayed within the nursery, reviewed Merritt's gauge locations. Then he walked the boundary from our side. When he reached the northwest corner, he stopped. Fresh decorative rock still covered much of the HOA slope, but the grade underneath did not disappear because somebody made it prettier. He wrote notes. I did not ask what they said. By then, the forecast showed another monsoon pattern forming. 3 days out. High moisture. Strong instability. Possibility of intense, localized rainfall. I stood in the nursery office looking at the radar model. For months, storms had meant damage. Now we had the water path protected, the cameras ready, the gauges marked, the county involved, the paperwork preserved. We had not built a trap for Karen. We had built an experiment, and the weather was going to run it for us. Karen found out about the county review before the storm arrived. I knew because Sonoran Vista residents started emailing me. The HOA had sent a community-wide message claiming that an adjacent commercial operator was attempting to transfer responsibility for a private erosion problem onto the association. They did not use my name. They did not need to. There was only one commercial nursery below them. The email said Sonoran Vista's infrastructure had been professionally designed and maintained. It also suggested my business was pursuing financial recovery from the community. That phrase did some work. By that afternoon, 3 negative reviews had appeared on our business page. One accused us of trying to shake down homeowners. Another said we should fix our own drainage instead of blaming families. A third was from an account that had apparently developed very strong opinions about commercial hydrology 5 minutes after being created. Mara wanted to respond. So did I. Adrian said no. Save them. That's it. Save them. Screenshot the HOA message too. She sent counsel a demand that the board preserve the communication and retract any materially false factual statements. Then she requested the full report from the second engineer Sonoran Vista had quietly hired. That was another surprise. Karen had brought in a new consulting firm after receiving our first county documents. The HOA email implied that this second engineer supported its position. The full report said something different. It did not blame the nursery. It said field verification was required to determine the current discharge route. And near the end, in plain language, the consultant recommended an immediate inspection of the western diversion area. That sentence had not appeared in the HOA's resident email. Adrian read it aloud. I said they left out the interesting part. They usually do. The full report went into the folder. By then, the folder was no longer a folder. It was 2 binders and a shared drive. Corinne's problem was becoming strangely repetitive. Each time she tried to prove nothing was wrong, she created another document showing somebody had told her to investigate. The county drainage inspector returned 2 days later. This time he had access to the Sonoran Vista common area through the HOA's management company. I was not present for most of that inspection. Later, he met Merritt and me at the boundary. His wording was careful. The observed western feature does not appear on the approved final drainage configuration. That was all he would say before completing his report. It was enough. An hour later, the HOA received a county instruction not to alter the disputed feature, pending completion of the review. No more gravel. No more shrubs. No more maintenance that happened to change the thing being investigated. Then, the weather forecast worsened. What had looked like scattered storms became a strong monsoon window, expected to hit our area late Thursday. Thursday was also the day Sonoran Vista had scheduled a special homeowner meeting. The stated purpose was to address misinformation concerning drainage and pending claims. Corinne had chosen the clubhouse, 6:30 in the evening. She apparently intended to settle the narrative before the county settled the drainage question. A local reporter from a Tucson area station called me Wednesday afternoon. Her name was Celine Ward. She had seen the drainage review listed on a public county agenda. Is there a dispute between your nursery and Sonoran Vista? Yes. Is it about unauthorized runoff? It's about where the runoff is coming from. Can I interview you? Talk to Adrian. That answer probably disappointed her. It delighted Adrian. The reporter eventually arranged to attend the HOA meeting as an observer after several residents invited her. Corinne agreed. I suspect she considered media presence an opportunity. People who are certain they control the story usually do. By Thursday morning, thunderstorm chances were high. At noon, the air felt heavy enough to lean on. The mountains disappeared behind gray buildup. The smell of hot dust hung over the nursery. Mara checked our retail schedule. We're closing at 4. Good. No customers after that. Good. She looked toward the north rows. You think it'll happen tonight? I did not answer immediately. The county inspector had agreed to attend the HOA meeting. Merritt was coming. Red Mesa had been asked to send a representative. Our cameras were live. Our gauges were ready. And one inconvenient fact had survived every email Corinne sent. If Sonoran Vista's basin was not discharging west, then the storm would prove her right. Thursday started with one final attempt to prevent exactly that. At 9:12 a.m., Sonoran Vista's attorney emailed Adrian, objecting to the county inspector entering the common drainage area without proper association authorization. Adrian forwarded it to the inspector. His response was short. He was reviewing compliance with county-approved drainage infrastructure and would coordinate access through the appropriate development authority. Corinne could control the clubhouse microphone. She did not control county jurisdiction. Around 11, Red Mesa Earthworks produced the field notes Adrian had requested. That changed something else. The original change order showed the western channel ending inside HOA property. The field notes contained an entry from the installation date, extended west cut for positive fall per owner field direction. Owner field direction. Adrian called Red Mesa's attorney. By early afternoon, the contractor provided a photograph taken by a crew supervisor. There was an excavator in the background. The western slope was open soil, and standing beside the trench was Corinne. Bright clothes, blonde hair, one arm extended toward the property boundary. A still photograph cannot tell you every word spoken when it was taken. We did not pretend it could, but it made Corinne's claim that the contractor had independently gone beyond scope considerably harder to sell. Red Mesa also confirmed its representative would attend the meeting. Merritt came to the nursery at 3. We checked the staff gauge, camera angles, backup batteries, rain gauges, time synchronization. The county-approved tracer material remained sealed with the inspector. Nothing would be used unless he authorized the test. At 4, Mara locked the retail gate. Our nursery crews had already moved vulnerable stock. She walked the rows one more time. Then we both stood under the potting shed roof looking north. The sky was turning the color of dirty steel. Far over the Catalina foothills, lightning flashed without sound. A minute later, thunder rolled across the valley. Slow, deep, not close yet, but coming. Adrian arrived at 5:30, carrying one rolling case and no visible anxiety. She had reduced months of dispute into 4 primary exhibits. The approved drainage plan, the $17,600 signed change order, the Red Mesa field photograph, the live camera feed from my nursery. Everything else was backup. Don't argue every point, she told me. I wasn't planning to. If she insults you, I've met her. If she blames your grading, Merritt answers. If she blames Red Mesa answers. If she says the west path never carried basin discharge, I looked at the sky. We wait. The clubhouse was already crowded when we arrived. Residents lined folding chairs in rows. A few people stood along the back wall. Corinne sat at the front table with the other board members. She wore another fuchsia suit, perfectly pressed. There was something almost impressive about maintaining that level of wardrobe confidence during a county drainage investigation. Nolan Reese, the board member who had tipped us off, avoided eye contact until Corinne turned away. Then he gave me one small nod. The county inspector sat near the side wall. Merritt placed his plan sheets on an easel. The Red Mesa representative sat behind him. Celine Ward stood near the rear with a cameraman. At 6:24, my phone buzzed. Mara, rain starting here. At 6:27, north gauge moving. I glanced through the clubhouse windows. The parking lot was still dry. The cell had reached the nursery first. At 6:30 exactly, Corinne called the meeting to order. She began with prepared remarks. Words like misinformation, commercial dispute, community protection. She said Sonoran Vista had acted responsibly. She said the nursery had unfortunately chosen escalation over cooperation. Then she looked directly at me. Mr. Mercer has repeatedly alleged that our stormwater infrastructure is somehow responsible for conditions on his private commercial property. Somehow. I almost smiled. Outside, the first heavy drops struck the clubhouse windows. Corinne continued. She did not seem to hear them, but everybody else did. Corinne gave me 5 minutes. That was her first mistake. I did not need 5. I stood beside Merritt's easel and held up the approved county drainage plan. This is Sonoran Vista's final approved drainage sheet. Merritt pointed to the arrows. Design detention discharges east through this armored spillway and culvert. I put the Red Mesa change order beside it. This is a later HOA-authorized temporary western overflow project, Corinne interrupted. A temporary maintenance measure that never discharged onto Mr. Mercer's property. Adrian did not move. Merritt pointed at his field survey. The current western grade creates a continuous hydraulic path toward the Mercer boundary. Corinne turned toward the residents. That is his consultant's opinion. The county inspector raised a hand slightly. It is also consistent with the field condition I observed. That quieted the room. Rain began hammering the clubhouse roof. Not gentle rain. Monsoon rain. Conversation became impossible for a few seconds. Then every phone in the front row seemed to light up with weather alerts. My own phone vibrated. Mara had sent a screenshot from camera 3. Water was entering the catch swale. I connected the live feed to the clubhouse display. The picture appeared behind Corinne. At first it showed only rain streaking across the lens and muddy water collecting near the boundary. Then the flow increased. Residents turned in their chairs. On-screen water surged from the exact northwest location we had documented. The staff gauge began disappearing, one mark at a time. Corinne stared at the screen. That could be surface runoff from anywhere. The county inspector stood. He had already coordinated the controlled tracing procedure with Merritt earlier that afternoon. Using the approved test point within Sonoran Vista's drainage area, the tracer was introduced under his supervision. Then we waited. That was the longest few minutes of the entire dispute. Not because I doubted the water path, because once you invite reality into the room, you do not get to tell it what answer to give. The live feed showed brown water rushing through our interception swale. Rainfall reading in one corner, timestamp in another, staff gauge in frame. Muddy runoff folding over the measuring section. Then a faint, fluorescent tint appeared. At first I thought the camera exposure was changing. Merritt stepped closer to the monitor. There, the color strengthened. A visible streak moved into the catch area. The inspector checked his watch. Then his field notes. Nobody spoke. The tracer had traveled from the HOA test point into the water entering my property. Right there. Live. In front of residents. In front of the board. In front of the county. In front of a television camera. Karen finally said, "That does not establish who constructed the—" Adrian placed the Red Mesa photograph on the easel. Excavator. Open trench. Karen standing beside it. The contractor representative stood from the second row. Karen turned toward him. "Your crew departed from the approved scope." He shook his head. "We built what we were directed to build." The room changed. You could feel it. Not shouting. Not chaos. Just that very specific silence when people realize the person who has been explaining everything may no longer be the person with the best explanation. Nolan Reese asked for the microphone. He wanted the $94,000 culvert recommendation entered into the meeting record. Another resident asked why the board had described the $17,600 overflow work as landscape maintenance. Someone else asked why homeowners were never told the basin operating level should have been lowered. Karen tried to redirect the questions toward me. She said I was using an extraordinary weather event to dramatize an ordinary maintenance dispute. I looked at the screen behind her. The tracer was still visible. "I didn't redirect your water," I said. "I just stopped letting you call it mine." That was the only line I had prepared. The county inspector then stated for the record that the observed discharge did not match the approved final drainage configuration, and that corrective action would be required pending his written findings. That ended the technical argument. The board discussion lasted another 40 minutes. By the end, Nolan moved to suspend Karen's unilateral contracting authority until an internal review could be completed. The motion passed 3-2. Karen voted against it. Naturally, nobody was arrested. Nobody got dragged out of a meeting. There were no handcuff sirens or theatrical confessions. There was something more useful. A signed change order. A contractor. An engineer. A county inspector. A live storm. And water that went exactly where gravity said it would. The written county findings arrived 9 days later. Sonoran Vista was required to restore its drainage system to the approved configuration. The unauthorized western diversion had to be removed. The damaged eastern culvert had to be repaired or replaced. And until that work was completed, the HOA had to operate the basin at a lower storm season level. Exactly what their first engineer had recommended months earlier. The HOA withdrew every citation and every $250 per day fine against me. In writing. Adrian insisted on that part. The damage claim took longer. Our documentation mattered. Mara's inventory spreadsheet mattered. Merritt's measurements mattered. The camera timestamps mattered. So did the fact that we had moved vulnerable stock and built a permitted interception system instead of allowing damage to continue just to make a point. Eventually, the nursery losses, engineering expenses, reasonable legal costs, and restoration work were resolved through a combination of HOA insurance, contractor liability participation, and association reserve funds. There was no giant lottery ticket settlement. I did not become a millionaire because rain went downhill. I got compensated for what could be supported. That was enough. Red Mesa repaired the western disturbance. A different contractor rebuilt the east drainage route. The decorative basins stayed. The HOA lawns survived. They simply had to stop using my nursery as the cheap part of their stormwater system. Karen resigned as president during the board review. She remained a homeowner. That was fitting. The subdivision did not disappear because one board president made bad decisions, and I never believed the people living there were my enemy. In fact, several Sonoran Vista residents became customers afterward. One man came into the nursery a month later, bought 2 desert willows, and stood at the counter looking embarrassed. "I believed the email," he said. "Which one?" He laughed. "Fair point." We shook hands. That was pretty much the whole conversation. Mara and I spent the next several weeks restoring the north rows. Some trees recovered. Some did not. There is a certain point with nursery stock where saving a damaged tree costs more labor than replacing it, which feels unfair until you remember the tree has no idea what your spreadsheet says. The worst scoured strip stayed empty for a while. Mara was the one who suggested we not put it back into commercial production. Instead, we worked with a local extension program and a small conservation group to create what became the Sonoran Waterwise Demonstration Grove. Native shade trees, drought-tolerant shrubs, simple signs explaining root depth, irrigation efficiency, erosion control, and how desert landscapes can function without pretending Tucson is Kentucky. Sonoran Vista donated to the project after its next board election. I appreciated that. Not because it erased what happened. It did not. But because communities are healthier when they can correct something without spending the next 20 years pretending nobody was wrong. A few months later, another storm rolled through. I was in the potting shed when the rain started. Creosote smell. Water drumming on metal. Same sounds that had made my stomach tighten all summer. I walked to the north boundary out of habit. The repaired system carried the subdivision runoff east. Our interception swale caught almost nothing. Just local rain. Normal rain. I stood there longer than necessary. Then I went back inside. If you have ever dealt with an HOA that seemed absolutely certain its paperwork mattered more than the facts on the ground, tell me what happened in the comments. And if you like stories where patience records and a little practical thinking finally get their day, share this one and subscribe. Because there is always another board somewhere, convinced nobody will check the plans. You know, the part I keep coming back to isn't the storm. It's that $17,600 change order. One signature. One cheaper shortcut. A few vague words in a budget report. And suddenly Dane was supposed to accept $38,000 in damage and a $250 a day fine for a problem somebody else created. That kind of thing works surprisingly often because most people are busy. They get the letter, see the official logo, feel their blood pressure climb, and start reacting before they know what the record actually says. Dane didn't give Corinne that. He kept the notices, pulled the plans, measured the water. And then when everyone finally ended up in the same room, he didn't have to make a speech. The rain handled most of it. I'm curious what you would have done when that first citation showed up. Would you have paid it just to make the problem go away, or started digging into the paperwork? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, give the video a like, share it with somebody who has an HOA story of their own, and subscribe to Karen HOA Courtroom. Because authority can write a letter, it still can't make water run uphill.